This episode is brought to you by QUANT Wrestling. QUANT takes the Moneyball approach to the sport of collegiate wrestling. They track and time every activity throughout a wrestling match and upload over 550 match stats to the QUANT app to do things like predict match outcomes. I love this feature. You can use it in the QUANT app, available now in the Google and Apple Play stores. That's QUANT. Use the discount code WCML to get your first month free. Now let's get to the episode.
I thought, if I win this match, if I'm national champ, if I get that title that I've been working so hard for all these years, I'm going to be happy the rest of my life. I'm going to be completely satisfied. And so I like to say, I don't know when that happiness left, but by the next morning it was gone.
We can endure anything and adapt and pivot and change. Wrestling gave us that ability.
I would say nothing in life has impacted me more than the things wrestling has taught me in terms of self-reflection, resilience.
Toughness. Some guys have it, some guys don't.
Adversity, 100%. How to pick myself up and be a man after I failed.
And everything that has shaped my life and where I'm at today would not be there without the values and basically the lessons I've learned through the sport of wrestling.
For me, wrestling saved my life because it allowed me to focus and channel my energy.
We're fortunate if you wrestle, because if you wrestle, natural talent helps, but it's 5% of the ingredient. It pales in comparison to heart and technique and effort.
It humbled me, taught me humility. Nothing can humble you more than wrestling. I think it's the learning to adapt, right? You learn how to adapt, you learn how to solve problems.
If I look back at my time I spent wrestling, if they gave me one thing more than anything else, it's mental toughness.
Welcome back to Wrestling Changed My Life, folks. This is your host, Ryan Warner. We're coming to you Monday, January 31st from Chicago IL. We had an awesome time in Iowa City with the happy hour. Thank you to everyone who came out. Thank you to Stalemates for co-hosting the happy hour with us. And then the Iowa-Penn State duel was amazing. Carver Hawkeye was crazy. It was an awesome duel meet, but excited to be back in the studio to bring you this episode with Stephen Barrett. Stephen was an NCAA champ for Oklahoma State in 1977. Then he went on a whole career, a whole world of living abroad. He worked for Athletes in Action, and he's lived in Moscow. He's lived in the North Caucasus, which is a super small region in southwestern Russia that produces some of the best wrestlers in the world. Stephen's also lived in Mongolia, and he has stories for days, folks, so I can't wait to get to this episode. Before we do, you know what time it is, Fan of the Week, and this one goes to Dan Willis. Dan is doing amazing things for wrestling here in Chicago. He's the one who introduced me to Stephen Barrett, so thank you, Dan, and thank you for listening to this show. And that's it, folks. Let's give it up for Stephen Barrett. Peace! Steve Barrett, welcome to the podcast, sir.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Really excited to have you on. We're going to talk about all of your travels and just the incredible life you've led, but I wanted to start with one area that I'm particularly interested in. Early 90s, Soviet Union comes to a fall, and I understand you're living in the States at this time, and once the Soviet Union fell, somehow or another it propelled you to take up new work in Moscow. Kind of walk us through that whole process and how you ended up there.
When I wrestled for Athletes in Action in the early 80s, late 70s and early 80s, I was actually with the team for 6 years. And for whatever reason, my wife and I both felt called to go to Russia. Like God wanted us to go there. But there was no way to get there. We tried several different avenues back in the mid 80s, but it just wouldn't happen. So it was always kind of a question mark in my mind why I felt called to go someplace that I couldn't get to. And literally almost 10 years from the early 80s, when we first felt that urge to move there, all of a sudden the Soviet Union opened up. Former teammate of mine, Carl Dampman, we worked together. We lived in Vienna, Austria for almost 3 years, my wife and I, and I worked together with Carl Dampman, and we went into Eastern European countries. I wrestled in a lot of tournaments then. So he had just recently moved to Russia. And he said, he invited John Peterson and I, and actually Claire Anderson, who was a national champ for Oklahoma State. We went on kind of a tour. We had a great time there in the fall of 90, or it might have been, no, I'm sorry, it was the early winter of 91. So I was on my way back to the airport, and all of a sudden I realized, oh, wow, God did call me to Russia, and now's the time. So I came home and I told my wife that, and she said, I knew that before you left. He's a little more intuitive than I am. So that's kind of what why we ended up moving there. Actually, the Soviet Union, when we moved, we got there, I think it was like 9 months later. So it would have been the fall of 91. I was on Red Square for whatever reason when the hammer and sickle flag, the red flag with the yellow hammer and sickle came down, and they raised up the, the red, white, and blue Russian, contemporary Russian flag.
Wow.
So Russia was the last of the 15 republics of the former Soviet Union to pull out of the Soviet Union and become an independent nation. And that happened while we were there.
What was the state of things when that was all going down? Was it chaos, or was it like inspiring?
Yeah, I don't know if I would describe it as inspiring. Chaos might be a little too strong, but when we moved there, we went, our local grocery store was called the Universam. Universam from the word universal. That means if we don't have it, you don't need it. We've got everything, universal. So when you go in there, the shelves were completely empty. The only thing they sold there was bread. There was a line that weaved throughout the whole store, a long line, and at the end of it was the bread counter. And when you waited in line for bread, you tell the lady what you want. She writes it on a piece of paper. Then you wait in line at the casa, the place where you pay. You wait in that line, you pay, then you come back with your ticket that says you paid, and you wait in line again at the bread counter.
What?
So anyway, and your how much you owed was calculated with an abacus. At your age, you probably don't even know what an abacus is, but it's definitely not electronic. It was what was used for the last millennia before calculators, but it's these beads, and they help you count it. So it went from that. When we moved 16 years later, our Universam was a modern grocery store, had probably 6 or 8 checkout lines and scanners, and they had almost everything on the shelf that you can imagine except for peanut butter. For whatever reason, I'm American and I like peanut butter, so I'd have that brought specially in. But literally, you could buy anything you wanted there. So wow. The Universam went through some big changes.
And so you were there for 16 years, from the fall of 91, till 16 years later, essentially.
Yeah, 07.
Wow.
That's right.
What a transformative time in Russia to be there and to see all of that. And, folks who are listening, this is a wrestling podcast, and Mr. Barrett, as he mentioned, wrestled in a ton of international tournaments, and, Oklahoma State national champ for the great Tommy Chesbro. We're going to hit on all that, but let's stay on this thread, because, you spent some time in an area that I got familiar with researching Slaying Saitiev. He was from Chechnya, lived in Dagestan, but you, once you got over to Russia, you kind of had a specialized focus in the Northern Caucasus.
Yes, I did.
Which one?
When I moved there, I started working out at CSKA, the Central Army Club of Moscow. Central Army Club of Moscow had, I think, like 80 Olympic champions on their list of it. And that's not just in wrestling, but, it was the most successful club in the history of sport, anywhere, not just in Russia. So I wrestled for them. I quickly learned that most of the guys wrestling for CSKA were from the Caucasus. And it was an assortment of guys, a lot of Ossetians, because the head coach, Anatoly Margiev, was an Ossetian. There were Dagestanis, Chechens, and, there's other republics of the North Caucasus that love wrestling that don't get a lot of notoriety, like Dagestan and Ossetia. But I met all those guys, always had a magnetic draw there, started going to Chechnya my first year there, not Chechnya, sorry, Ossetia my first year there, ended up, spent a lot of time there, spent a lot of time in Dagestan, and then even got to go to Chechnya one time or two times.
Wow. And during that time, it was really crazy for Chechnya with the war, and first in 95 and then in 2000, that one was particularly, devastating for those cultures. So you were working with those people from that region all through that?
Yes. Yeah. I wanted to move there right away.
Wow.
My wife and I have 3 daughters. And there's a custom there where if you find a gal you like, you get your buddies together, you kidnap her, and you bring her home. And so for whatever reason, my wife didn't like that for our 3 daughters. And so we didn't actually move to the Caucasus until our last daughter went off to college.
Wow. That is... I had seen that, or I saw that in the research, but wasn't sure how true that was. But that was something that was real enough to be a concern for your wife.
My oldest daughter, Amelia, she, I told all my kids, you got to do some sport, And so my 2 younger ones went off to a gymnastic club that cranks out Olympic champions. A coach, paid special attention to them. And then my daughter went to a Sambo club, Sambo 70, which Putin himself was somehow associated with. And so I decided I'll take her to wrestling practice. She can kind of see the difference and kind of see where dad works out and, see some of these guys. Well, anyway, she'd only been there a half hour. She's got long blonde hair. And this Chechen comes up to me and says, "Hey, Zilim Khan," he says, "I'm in love with your daughter, and may I have permission to kidnap her?" And so, if you respect the father, you would ask permission before you actually kidnap. Now, that doesn't happen all the time. In fact, most of the time, it's just a kidnapping. But he, out of respect, he came to me and asked, if he could kidnap her. Now, the girl doesn't have any choice. It's the dad and the guy asking the question. So anyway,
Lord.
I said, "Zilim Khan, how could you possibly be in love with her? You don't even know her name." He doesn't say another word. He gets up, goes over to her, looks down at her and goes, "Hey, Snow White, what's your name?" So, she says what her name is. He comes back and says, "I know her name. Now let's talk business." He says, I'm prepared to give you a Mercedes. And he gave me some model number. And so anyway, I had to gently, you don't want to offend a Chechen. Trust me. I had to gently, let him down. She's not old enough in our culture. We let our children grow up first. So anyway, in a non-offensive way, I told him that I couldn't really do that.
Wow. That is a crazy situation to find yourself in, to say the least. So you raised 3 daughters in Moscow, which I'm sure that's a story in itself, just in terms of, that experience being so different than the States. But ultimately, you do move to the North Caucasus. Where did you move to specifically?
We moved, if you're going west from Ossetia, if you go east, you hit Chechnya, then Dagestan. If you go west toward the Black Sea, the very next republic over of the North Caucasus is called Kabardino-Balkaria. And then the next one over is Karacháyevo-Cherkessia. And both those republics have cranked out some really good wrestlers. Geduyev. Geduyev is from Kabardino-Balkaria.
And so, I mean, just a tough culture, mountainous culture, I'm sure. I mean, how does one go about buying a house in a place like that?
In Moscow, we'd only ever rented an apartment. And I went down there and I tried to rent an apartment. Nobody was particularly interested in renting to an American. And so anyway, I found out that a 3-room apartment was going to run me about $12,000. So I thought, hey, why don't I become a apartment owner? So I got an apartment in a really nice section of town, right next to a park, where if you ran all the way through the park, boom, you're right in the foothills of the Caucasus. So it was a really nice place for us to live.
And you're doing work that I would consider to be extremely challenging in a Muslim country. What was the reception like when you got out on the streets and started doing your work?
Good question. Yeah, it is a difficult place for a Christian missionary to work, among Muslims. I found them gracious, very hospitable. I loved living there. If you asked me, well, what place, where have you lived that you liked the most? That would definitely be close to the top of the list. Let's put it that way. I loved living down in the Caucasus.
What was it about it?
Their culture. I love the hospitality. I love the way these guys wrestled. They're tough guys. They wrestle with this confidence, and it's not necessarily confidence that they're going to win. They had confidence that they were going to go out there and give that guy everything they had, and win or lose, that guy was going to know that he was in a match. So I really like that. I don't know, the mentality, especially of the wrestlers down there.
Mm. And so how are you working with them from a wrestling standpoint? Are you hosting a club and every night you're coaching, or are you working with a local club?
When I lived down there, I went to a couple different clubs, probably 3 different clubs. I did help out a little bit. I showed some stuff, worked with the guys a little bit. I did a lot of training with them. I love to, get in there and work out with them. I would help out any way I could. With the help of my, AIE guys in America, we'd bring a team there every year, somewhere in the former Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. And we did bring teams several times down to the Caucasus and wrestled these different clubs. A lot of these guys didn't have access at all to wrestling shoes. And so, I'd bring, you get two pieces of luggage back then anyway. And one of my pieces of luggage was always full of wrestling shoes. Bill Farrell of ASICS, mm-hmm. He would give me just incredible deals on closeout models. And so I was always supplying these guys with wrestling shoes.
Wow, you're like the Godfather walking in with a suitcase full of new shoes.
That's right. Santa Claus.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. I mean, you're just talking about a region, people in the States think Iowa or Oklahoma, it's the cradle of wrestling. But if you talk about the world, the Caucasus certainly are the cradle of wrestling when you look at what those very small places have been able to do. And, you think about, everyone thinks about Moscow, they think of Russia, but I got to imagine, how different is the Caucasus from Moscow in terms of living everyday life?
When I first went to Russia, I wrestled in the Tbilisi tournament. Mm-hmm. In 1978, and we just called them Ruskies, which is the Russian name for themselves. They call themselves Ruski. So when I went there, we ended up wrestling, in Georgia, mm-hmm. is the Tbilisi tournament. Then we went to Armenia, we went to Azerbaijan, then we had a match in Moscow, and I found out they're not all Russians. There's Georgians, there's Armenians, they're Azerbaijans. And I found out that there were different people there. So I always had an interest in these, especially those places where wrestling was really tough. Yeah, you can go to other cultures, Uva, way out in Siberia, 5 time zones from Moscow. You can go to Buryatia. Several famous wrestlers are from Buryatia. They're Mongolian looking. There are lots of places out there, little minority people groups where wrestling's a big deal. So I was always attracted to going those places too.
Yeah.
And yes, they are very different than the Russian culture. Culturally, how they think, what they do. Different.
Yeah. It's interesting. They, of all the republics that split off, in the early 90s and became a country, obviously Chechnya always wanted to, and that never happened. I think it's just such an interesting part of the world. So you were there for quite some time and ultimately ended up in Mongolia. How'd you get there?
Well, in wrong century, 2007, I was deported from Russia. So that's an interesting story. But
let's hear that story first. Hold on a second. Deported from the motherland, like forcefully?
Forcefully, yeah.
Had you had run-ins like with the KGB leading up to it, or?
I had, yeah. Several.
Tell us about them.
Let's see. In Dagestan, I was with a group in Dagestan, and we were visiting some colleges, the Dagestan State University, Makhachkala. We addressed, our first meeting. There was 150 students that were English students that came and, they just asked us questions. We had an open forum. Everybody had a good time. The teachers loved it. I was down in the courtyard afterwards talking to students. One girl said, this was the best day of my life. And another student said, yes, mine too. So anyway, everybody had fun. The next day we went back, and the KGB had shut it down. They told the vice rector of the university was a wrestling coach, and he told me kind of on the side that they had threatened the college, the university, that if they let the Americans come in one more time, they were all getting fired. So anyway, we after a while, we ended up leaving, and on the way out of Dagestan, our van gets pulled over at a checkpoint, and our driver was a local guy, so he goes in and finds out from the police, why are you pulling over the Americans? They said, well, it was an edict from the government to stop the white van with Americans in it. So anyway, that was the start of a 2-day ordeal. I had friends in Chechnya. I knew the Minister of Sport, Haji Murat Magomedov, Olympic champion in '96. He was there. Magomedov was a world champion heavybweight. They came to explain to the KGB that this is a mistake. Everybody likes this guy. So anyway, we ended up going before a federal court judge. And the story's a little more detailed, but when he heard the whole story, and we had witnesses to attest to the fact that we tried to register our passports, but the registration office wouldn't register us. He said, federal court judge, he says, we call ourselves democratic. We are anything but democratic. And he slaps down his gavel and says, let these people go. And so we were told, you can go now. The KGB said no. Bring him back to the Office of Immigration. So anyway, this guy, the head KGB guy, he took me off to the side, and he told us what the real problem was. The real problem was I had given out some DVDs of a film about Jesus. And when Jesus talks in this film, it's straight out of the book of Luke, the Gospel of Luke. So he says, that's completely legal. but we are Muslim here, and I'm going to do everything I can to get you kicked out of the country. So when I was deported, probably 6 months later, I knew people at the airport where I was being deported from. And they went and asked the KGB guys, hey, what's the American in for? And they go, we don't even know, but we know it's from an incident that took place in Dagestan. Whoa. So there were other incidences. They broke into our apartment and got into our computer one time while we were gone. I've been held up by the KGB probably on 4 different occasions, ranging from 2 days to, only 5 or 6 hours detained by the KGB.
In a prison?
They didn't actually put us in prison. We were at the jail. I mean, there was a jail there, but they didn't actually stick us in it. No.
I can't believe that even the judge said you could go and they still put their foot down. And ultimately, 6 months later, they just wouldn't let it go. Right.
Yeah. Well, it shows you their card trumps every other card.
Right.
And before I got deported, I was held in a room in an airport for like 3 days. And on the 3rd day, they put me on a plane. And it was the first plane that left the little town that we lived in. It was going to Turkey. I had my choice between like Turkey and Syria. And the flight going to Turkey happened to be the first one out, thankfully. But
so you get to Turkey with nothing?
What's that?
You get to Turkey with nothing? Just like yourself? No, you haven't packed anything? I mean, you're by yourself. Your wife's behind still?
Because of my friend in the airport, my wife got to come once.
Oh.
And actually, I think that's the only time I ate. She brought some pizza. So anyway, my wife told different folks, and some of them, one of them was a special appointee by the president, by Putin, for all of physical education for all the children in Russia. I won't mention everybody's name, but some important people, okay? And when they called, they picked up the phone to call to intercede on my behalf. Tell them, hey, this is a mistake. This guy has only done good things for us. They got a call right afterwards. All 3 of them gave me the same story. They got a call right afterwards from who, and they said, if you bring this up anymore, you're going to lose your jobs. So I said, no, don't stop. Don't talk anymore about it. I didn't want them losing their job.
Oh my gosh. So that's, the relationships you had over there and the fact that they're no match for the forces that be. And so you end up in Turkey, and is your wife able to get out okay?
She was there for another month, selling our house, gave my car to a friend. I gave her a whole list of people to say goodbye to because I never got a chance to say goodbye. I was coming back from a wrestling camp in southern Ossetia, a place called Skhin Valley, who Vadim Bogiev's from this little town. Lots of guys are from this little town, tough guys. So I was coming back, and so that's why I was detained in my own airport. So she had to stay for another month. She learned all kinds of words she'd never heard in the Russian language in order to sell an apartment. I mean, it was incredibly complicated. It took document after document, signed by the right people in order to be able to sell it. And then she found a buyer. And anyway, it was very stressful for her, especially going and saying goodbye to all my friends that I didn't have a chance to say goodbye to.
And plus, she's living in an apartment that they're watching and that they've broken into before. I mean, that alone will give you the creeps.
Yeah, yeah, it's true.
Oh my Lord, that is crazy. Before we shift lanes, I'm just curious. While you were in the Caucasus region, did you ever have a chance to bump into the great Bovasar Saitiev? Did you ever see him anywhere?
Oh yeah. We saw each other every now and then.
Was he friendly? What was he like?
Yeah, he was friendly. Yeah. we didn't get to be good friends because I didn't run into him that often. He trained all the way out in Krasnoyarsk. So usually I saw him like once a year out there. I did see him more than once in the Caucasus though, but we were casual friends.
Yeah, no, I kind of forget that you were there when he was still training in Krasnoyarsk, and obviously now he lives in Moscow, so he's never really returned since he left at a young age. And so, kind of the whole genesis of how all this started, you traveling the world, doing missionary work, is that you were a star wrestler at Oklahoma State, and I'm hoping we could talk a little bit about that, but ultimately you had a realization that, success in sports didn't leave you satisfied like you thought. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's right.
So kind of before you had this realization, though, what kind of an athlete were you and what kind of competitor were you kind of coming up through high school and college?
I started wrestling about halfway through my freshman year in California. We had just moved from Massachusetts. I remember telling my basketball coach, I always loved sport, but basketball wasn't it. But it was the only sport available, so that's what I went out for. I remember telling him, hey, my family's moving. I've got to go. And I remember a clipboard was in his hand. He looked up from the clipboard. He goes, oh, okay, goodbye. I don't know if he even recognized who I was, but so I go to this new school right during the Christmas break. So the season's half over, and I, in my basketball shoes, I asked the coach if I could wrestle, and he said yes. So I started wrestling right there. 2 weeks later, varsity guy gets sick, JV guy is injured. So I got to wrestle for the team, and it's against the league champion, reigning league champion. So my coach says, what instructions do you give? He says, don't get pinned. So I followed his instructions carefully for 52 seconds. And that's when I got pinned. But anyway, I loved wrestling right off and, got better and better. And my junior year, I won the Southern section. My senior year, for the first time in the history of California, that was 1973, there was a state tournament in California. They put the whole state together, 800 schools that wrestled, put it all together in one big tournament, no classes there in California.
Oh my.
And so anyway, a teammate of mine and I, we both won that, and we both ended up going to Oklahoma State.
So the first time ever was your senior year for the state tournament. For the state tournament.
State tournament, 1973, my senior year. Yeah.
Wow. For such a powerhouse state, that's late to have to just start holding the tournament like that. Interesting.
Well, think about it. California is like 700 miles long and probably 200 miles wide. The infrastructure of roads and everything wasn't such that, people could go that far to a state tournament until, the 70s. All of a sudden, you had interstates, you had bigger roads, freeways. So they put it all together back when they could.
Just imagine being a fan of California wrestling back then. And, probably for years they were saying, I wish we had a state tournament. Then finally it happens. I mean, the buildup and the atmosphere there must have been unreal.
Yeah, it was cool. The first state tournament. There were a lot of folks there. That's right.
How big was your high school back then?
Our high school is considered 2A, and it went all the way up to the 5A in California. But we had 100 kids in our high school. It was considered small, but it wasn't really that small.
Right. I mean, but compared to some of the other schools in California, I mean, pretty unique to have two champs from one school. And if you think about, you started your freshman year, what do you think allowed you to get better so quickly and jump so many levels?
Yeah, my high school coach, Duffy Brailsford, I remember him telling my kids the story about me, coming in the wrestling room and people were flying through the air and I didn't know how to do anything, but there was a lot of grunting and action. So he put an assistant coach on me to teach me the fundamentals because he could see something was going on there. It was kind of too early to tell, but he knew that there was potential there. Let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. And so with experience, I got better and better. And I'll tell you another thing. he took us to summer tournaments there in Southern California. So we wrestled, probably 10 tournaments in the summer. We wrestled more matches in the summer, freestyle, than we did during the year. So that was massive in, getting experience.
And when you went to Oklahoma State, they were the Kings back then. Did you call Tommy Chesbro, or did he come calling to you?
There were actually a couple guys at the California State tournament, and as far as I know, the only two guys they talked to were my buddy John Jackson, that was the state champ for my high school, and me. So we both flew there, and I remember it was Jim Shields, who was a good wrestler a really good wrestler for Oklahoma State. He was one of the guys, and he introduced himself as the coach at Oklahoma State. So he got picked up at the airport by this guy, and we were already kind of a little bit. It's like, why did the coach send a flunky to pick us up? Well, it turns out that was Tommy Chesbro, the guy that picked us up. I mean, it showed us how much we knew. And Tommy Chesbro says, "Hey, we won the nationals last year. This school has won 27 national titles. So if you figure it out, NCAA wrestling started in 1928. This is 1973. Over half the years, Oklahoma State was first. But my buddy and I, John and I, looked at each other, and we knew that wasn't true, because we went to Hitchcock's camp, he was the coach at Cal Poly, and they had won the national tournament that year. So how could Oklahoma State have won? And we challenged them on it. We said, hey, Cal Poly won it last year. And that's when we found out there was such a thing as D2 and D1. and then in D1, they actually took 11th place.
Wow.
Although they were champions in D2, they took 11th place in D1. And anyway, that's kind of when we said, oh, man, we want to go to Oklahoma State.
Man, it just shows you how, now the exposure so much that, middle schoolers know the difference. But even guys like you back then who were state champs, college wrestling was like kind of so underexposed that you didn't even know about the different divisions,
It's true. And I can imagine me not knowing, but Don didn't know either. He knew a lot more than me, trust me.
What was Chesbro like once you got in the room with him?
I always liked being one of his wrestlers. I had a very different style of wrestling, a very unorthodox style. So I don't know that,
he was a relentless driller, right?
What's that?
He was a relentless driller, right?
And his technique, I mean, it was incredible. And he'd show one thing after another. And how would you like to coach a guy that, you show him and show him and show him, and he doesn't do it. He can't do it. He had this appreciation for really fine-tuned technique. And if you looked at my 10 favorite moves that I used, there wasn't a name for any of them. So one time he was giving a lecture during practice. All the guys were seated, and he's giving a lecture on the importance of technique, and he's talking about different guys. He talks about Roger Roberts. He's really good at the high crotch and the fireman's carry, and he's talking about different guys. And I'm avoiding eye contact, and for whatever reason, I happen to look up, and right then our eyes connected, and he said, there's Steve's philosophy. You throw enough stuff, and he didn't say stuff, but anyway, you throw enough stuff against the wall, some of it's going to stick. So, it was a pretty good description of my wrestling.
Man. And, think about, I just love that era of Oklahoma State because, Leroy was there, Eric Weiss. Those are some fun stories to hear about, in the kind of the Wild West back then. And, your junior year, you take third, and by all accounts from what I read, you were just like super goal oriented, super driven, and only a national title would do. And then after that, you were just singularly focused the whole following year.
So that third place, I actually lost to an unseeded guy in the quarters. Came back, wrestled some of the, literally I wrestled the best matches of my life. My first match coming back was a defending national champ, Don Roan. And I don't know when the match ended, but it was under a minute. I was already ahead of him by more than 10 points when I pinned him. In the consolation finals, those matches are only 6 minutes. I wrestled a guy for third and fourth. When the match was over, I was ahead of him 20-6 in a 6-minute match. Yeah. So I was on fire, but yeah, when everything was over, I got my medal or whatever. I went into a corner somewhere and cried because it was this massive disappointment. But I had the next year. So yeah, I did try hard the next year.
How would you describe like some of your workouts and just your mentality leading up to the NCAAs in '77 when you were a senior?
Once again, I was really bad with drilling because I didn't know that stuff. And so anybody who got me as a drill partner, they knew there wasn't going to be any drilling going on. Because I didn't like the whole concept of allowing someone to take you down. I didn't want to feel that.
So you couldn't even, I'm sure you could have, but like if Chesbo said drill a sweep single, that wasn't something that you were just that comfortable doing?
No, I was just awful at all that stuff. I know it's crazy, but.
Oh, it's so funny though. Obviously you had a system because you were a 4-time Big 8 champ and the first California state champ to ever win a D1 title. But it's just crazy to hear that.
Yeah.
So, 77 nationals, your whole focus, your whole life comes, you win it. And then like the next day, it sounds like your whole life changed. Your whole life started in a way. Kind of just talk us through like what you were feeling and how that led to some of the travels we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. When I won, I thought, that was my ultimate goal. I thought if I win this match, if I'm national champ, if I get that title that I've been working so hard for all these years, I'm going to be happy the rest of my life. I'm going to be completely satisfied. And so I like to say, I don't know when that happiness left, but by the next morning it was gone. It really was. And even I'd been so disappointed the year before, and even in winning, I felt disappointment because achieving my ultimate goal didn't bring me what I thought it was going to bring. So it opened me up to start thinking about, my relationship with God. I had put myself first, my achievements first. I wrestled for my own glory. Hey, I wanted everybody to look at me and say, oh, that guy's a tough wrestler. Oh, he's good, But this whole thing helped me understand really why I'm here on this earth, why God put me here, and helped me to understand that the most important thing in my life isn't bringing glory to me. It's bringing glory to God. So long after that, some AIA guys talked to me, and one of them was Gene Davis, and proposed the possibility of joining Athletes in Action, and I knew right then. It wasn't because I was missionary material, okay? But I knew that that's what I needed. I needed to be around these guys and be brought up by them, because I was pretty influenced by everything that was going on around me. And so I wanted to put myself in that environment, in that atmosphere. And so anyway, I said yes.
Was this before or after the Dave Schultz match?
This was, you know what? It was probably 1 year after I won the Nationals. Yeah.
What happened in the Schultz match?
Dave Schultz came to Oklahoma State. Everybody in the country wanted him for obvious reasons. I mean, he was already very famous while he was still in high school. Shocked a lot of people at how he did in open tournaments. So when he got to Oklahoma State, I had just graduated, so I was like, an graduate assistant coach. I was working on my master's degree. So anyway, we wrestled every day in practice. And in the middle of November, we had what was called the orange and black match, our school colors. Coach divided everybody up into two teams. Well, Dave did not have a worthy challenger in the room. So, usually it's got to be two guys that are eligible because one of them's going to make the team. Mm-hmm. But Coach wanted me to wrestle Dave. And, obviously there's reasons for it. I was defending national champ. He knew that if and I was one of the crowd favorites. I mean, people loved to watch my wrestling. And they didn't have a name for any of my moves either, but it was a lot of fun to watch this crazy guy with all this hair, which not a lot of hair now, but so I wrestled, I was going to wrestle with Dave, and when Dave got there, I had some crazy stuff and I could take him down, and he would stop me, and nobody was like Dave in this category. I've never seen anything like it. He was like a savant. He'd say, "How did you do that?" I'd show him how to do it. "How do you stop that?" I'd show him how to stop it. Dave would be using my favorite move on me the next day. I'm telling you, I've never seen anything like it. The ability to pick up moves and pick up, the defense to moves, it was incredible. So, by the time the middle of November came along, I didn't have any secrets left. I was 8 classes below Dave. I wrestled 142 back then. That was the weight class. He wrestled 157. So I was 2 weight classes from him. And I didn't want to wrestle Dave, but evidently duty called. And I did have a scholarship, so I needed to do what the coach said. So anyway, that night, I was introduced. The crowd, rose to their feet and gave me a standing ovation, like always. Then we started wrestling. Dave got the first 2 points. Already there's people cheering for Dave. And then at some point, he picks up a couple more points. And by the third period, and there's this growing momentum in the gym, it's getting louder and louder. And at some point in the third period, I got Dave's in a single leg. I'm pulling so hard to take him down. I broke my own rib, and I've got a big lump here in my side to this day from that match. So I didn't even call a timeout. The ref saw that I was injured. He calls timeout. So I'm laying there trying to breathe, and I got people literally booing now. That I'm stalling. I'm tired. And so anyway, at the end of the match, Dave wins, and I'd never heard so much noise in Gallagher Hall. They just went crazy, and obviously, I thought that they loved me. It turns out they didn't really love me. They loved it when I won. They loved it when I scored points for the team. But for me, personally, they'd found a new hero, another guy that's going to wrestle for him for 4 years. So I don't want to denigrate my fans, Oklahoma State people in any way. I think it's the same everywhere you go.
Right.
But because even now looking back, there's no place I would have rather wrestled. Oklahoma State, I love Oklahoma State. I love the crowds, but they have their limitations. So let's just put it that way.
But it's a good reminder, though, that the people the fans are booing or cheering for, they're just like 21, 20-year-olds. And sometimes that stuff really does bother people. And for whatever, that night it hit home with you, and it kind of led to this, revival or big turning point in your life where you ultimately did join Athletes in Action, moved to Austria, and you're being coached by the great John Peterson. And I didn't realize it was like an RTC club back then. Maybe still is.
Wait a minute. Oh, Athletes in Action or RTC club.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Because when you lived in Austria, it seemed like you had a coach and you had team members and you were doing the circuit. You were traveling the circuit.
We were. It was a small team. We spent most of our time in Eastern Europe. It was, there was a lot of wrestling going on, I ended up wrestling in a total of 15 different international tournaments. And a lot of them, at least half of them, were during this time frame. So yeah, it was cool. We went to a lot of training camps. We went on 8 separate occasions. I was in Poland wrestling with their national team at training camps. 4 separate occasions, Czechoslovakia, twice Romania. Spent time in Bulgaria, East Germany even. So a lot of opportunity to wrestle in some really cool places. Yeah.
Unbelievable. I mean, just the experiences you must have are amazing to think about. I just wanted to wind down with, you've obviously seen wrestling at the highest level in all these other countries. You've seen it at a high level in the States. And just kind of from a coaching perspective, wanted to pick your brain on like what some of the key differences you see are in terms of coaching and bringing up youth athletes in the Caucasus as opposed to the States.
A huge emphasis on technique. You look at those guys, those coaches, the Soviet style of wrestling. And so they when the Soviets took over Mongolia, they came in and you look at the Mongolians. Mongolian style is somewhat affected by their national style of wrestling, but mostly by the Soviet school of wrestling. So you look at the Soviet school of wrestling that got promoted all over Eastern Europe. They emphasize the highest percentage moves. Highest percentage moves, head outside single, high crotch, head outside single, fireman's carry. I remember going to I think it was 2015, the World Championships were in Uzbekistan. So I was there for that. I don't know if there were still 10 weight classes. Maybe there was only 7 weight classes at that time. Every winner except for one was from Russia, from Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Every one of those Russians that year were from the Caucasus. The only non-Russian to win that year was a Turk. Well, it turns out that Turk was he was definitely a Chechen. I think he was a Dagestani Chechen. Couldn't make the team, so he went to Turkey, wrestled for Turkey, and he won the World Championships. Okay, so everybody that won that year was from Russia, was from the Caucasus.
Mm-hmm.
And most of them were either Dagestan or Ossetia. Every single one of them came out with a high crotch or fireman's carry. If you set up the high crotch, your hands, your feet, everything are exactly like a fireman's carry. You do the same motion with a fireman's carry. So every single first move scored off your feet was a shot, head outside shot. Whether it got finished with a fireman's carry, So, and I've got a theory. I love, to use my hips on defense. If somebody grabbed my right leg, it was like, it was my birthday, for sure. I used to have, no, I didn't really have names for this, impossible and highly unlikely was my left leg. Now it's, it's more like, probably, and take me, I'm yours. It's my leg names have changed. But anyway, I loved it when a guy grabbed my right leg. I had really good defense. coming from the hips. Our defense in America is very different now. It's bend at the hips and reach over and grab an ankle or something, which doesn't work internationally because their hips in Russia, down in the Caucasus are so good. You'll never take that guy down unless you blast all the way through him. If you stop at any point in the match, it's over. The defense is so good there. But the defense, the really, really good defense, the use of the hips has made the offense so much better.
Yeah. So you're saying their philosophy on defense is still heavy hips, strong hips, and attacking, with those. And, when you compare that to a high C or a fireman's, the parallels are there.
Yeah. So the high C, it's perfect because you come in and you turn that corner right away to eliminate the hip pressure, and you either switch off to a double or fireman's.
Right. You think about one of the great wrestlers in the States, Spencer Lee. He has a vicious fireman's, and he can hit it from the inside or the outside. So maybe we need to go back to the fireman's a little bit more now that you say that. This is exactly the kind of conversation I was hoping to have around the coaching and the development, just because you saw it for so long. From a matches standpoint, were they getting more or less matches, you think, at a young age than we're seeing here?
Their philosophy of little kids, they'll only do gymnastics with little kids. They want them body position, body coordination. They're wrestlers. When they warm up, they're doing backflips across the mat. They're doing back saltos all the time. They're much more acrobatic than we are. And it's because of how they get them started. So they've got really good body control before they ever even, show them how to wrestle.
Yeah.
I remember in the Soviet Union going there for that first Tbilisi tournament that I went to. We were in a club, and there were little kids out on the mat, and there was a coach there with a clipboard, and he was saying stuff, but I knew what he was saying. There was a list of moves there, and he was saying, shoulder throw to the right, shoulder throw to the left, fireman's to the right, fireman's to the left. And he's checking them off as he goes through. And I realized, and this kid, he's probably 10 years old, and he's doing each one of these moves with incredible accuracy, technical perfection, moves that, there's no way I could do it like that. So I realized, how much emphasis they put on technique and doing technique exactly right, so that when they're drilling the technique, I help with a couple colleges around here. When these guys are drilling technique, they're drilling it so sloppy sometimes. Now, I'm not going to say everybody is, but a lot of the guys are doing it in a real sloppy way. These guys, when they drill it with finesse, with explosion. They're not going to hurt their opponent. It is drilling, but they're going to do it explosive and picture perfect. And I love the way they drill.
I'd love to see it more in more detail and just observe like you're talking about, because, man, they're doing something right. And, the Eureka's going on right now. So it's been pretty NCAA focused around here, but the Eureka gets us all just excited that, in a couple of months, we're going to be in the heart of the freestyle season, which is starting to become my favorite more than folk style, I will say.
Yeah.
Now, just the last thing I wanted to wind down with is, you're in Missouri now, and you seem like a man who's constantly on the go and, exploring new parts. Is it hard for you to settle back in the States after living abroad so long?
I love my farm. It's almost like the Garden of Eden for me. I do enjoy taking tours overseas, athletes in action. Before COVID, we were doing 3 trips a summer. We took a group to Mongolia every year. I didn't mention, but I lived in Mongolia for 5 years also. So I've got really good connections there. I love the wrestling there. Take a group to there, and we have a camp there every year. We have a camp in Ukraine. We take a group there every year. And then the third group was for more elite wrestlers, college or beyond. We for 5 years, I think 5 years in a row, we either went to Central Asia or the Caucasus region.
Wow.
Yeah. So
right to the thick of it.
We had only one last year. We went to Ukraine. I hope we're going to have 2 this year. But yeah, I still love to get reconnected with a lot of friends of mine. I got reconnected with several people that I wrestled back when I wrestled against the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And that was so much fun reconnecting with those guys.
I mean, what a journey it's been for you, and just so thankful you were able to come on here and share a little bit of it. Stephen Barrett, greatly appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming on, sir.
You are welcome. Pleasure to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, sir.
I can't believe anybody remembers me. Yeah. That's crazy.
Oh, man, that's I've heard a lot of people, as soon as I said you were coming on, they're very excited for it, and I've sourced some questions from them, so I appreciate those folks. And again, it's just been really fun to chat with you this morning.
All right. Thanks.
Take care. This episode is brought to you by QUANT Wrestling. QUANT takes the Moneyball approach to the sport of collegiate wrestling. They track and time every activity throughout a wrestling match and upload over 550 match stats to the QUANT app to do things like predict match outcomes. I love this feature. You can use it in the QUANT app, available now in the Google and Apple Play stores. That's QUANT. Use the discount code WCML to get your first month free.